Hello everyone, my name is DM Cross and you're watching Praetor Magic, and this is episode 6 of season 3 of our Commander Online series. For this episode, things are going to be a little bit different. We did stream the episode live on twitch.tv, which you can always go and join us on the second and fourth Saturday at 9 PM Eastern Time to watch these episodes live. However, there were some audio issues and unfortunately it was just very bad and it wasn't able to be fixed. So what we're going to do is I'm going to basically do a voiceover narration of the episode. I'm going to start this off talking a little bit about the decks as much as I can. Obviously, I played one of the decks and not the other three, so I'll do my best to kind of explain my thoughts and opinions on the decks based on how they played in the game. And then I'm just going to go turn by turn and explain what's going on as it's going on so that you guys have something to listen to as we go. And it will actually probably be a slightly quicker video. However, before we get to the deck text and then to the game, I do of course want to give a shout out to our sponsors, which are inkgaming.com, where it's your game, your style. You can go to the inkgaming.com/PraetorMagic sponsor link and basically get your customized playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, anything you want while also supporting the channel. These things are fantastic. I have the mouse pads and the playmats ordered myself and they are great quality. They are great customization, everything you could possibly want in order to customize how your gameplay is. Our second sponsor now is TCG Player, where you can go to the link that is down in the video description and they will know that we sent you there. If you're going to be buying your singles or your sleeves or anything else from TCG Player, you might as well just use that link. You get to support the channel and everything that we do here. And then let's get on to the deck decks. So for this episode, I played Kethis, which is a deck that I had played previously in the season. The first one was more of a legendary creatures beatdown deck. It's kind of the deck that I love from Don Miner, who is the owner over at EDA Trek. I've played it against it a few times and it always performs very well when he plays it. My first showing I felt like did not go as well, so I kind of took and put my own spin on this one. It is a Planeswalker base deck, it's a Super Friends deck. So as you can see from, the deck tech that's on your screen, there is quite a few Planeswalkers in there and ways to get them out and ways to benefit from them. And it's kind of just a controlling Super Friends deck in Abzan, where I can potentially recur the Planeswalkers multiple times just by, exiling cards from my graveyard with Kethis to be able to replay them because they are legendary spells. I did like this version better, and I'm sure you'll see why as we go through the video. But let me know what you guys think, of course, down in the comments below. If you want to see something else specific with Kethis, I'm down to run Kethis again. I have vaguely toyed with the idea of angels and elves. Legendary angels and elves. Angels is a little bit harder because there's not as many white and black, and there are no green black angels. But there is a lot of mono white, green white. There are some white black, so we might be able to make it work. We'll see. The second deck that we want to talk about is John's deck. He decided to play Oketra, God Eternal Oketra specifically, not the OG Oketra. And it was a pretty standard Oketra deck that you would expect to see. There were some ways to bounce creatures back to his hand so that he could replay them. And of course, every time you play a creature with Oketra out, you get another zombie on top of that. There were some other things that he did with the zombies in terms of he could turn around and get angels instead of zombies with Divine Visitation. He had a decent amount of control spells and removal spells, so it was your standard, I guess, Oketra deck with some, pet cards of his own personal thinking. I did like that it had a little bit of a control based feature, and as you can see from the deck tech, he tried to pay attention to, the shortcomings of mono white, which is like draw and ramp and stuff like that. With Oketra, that's actually decently easier to handle. Things like Wall of Omens, when you're going to be bouncing creatures back and reusing their enter the battlefield effects. White does have some enter the battlefield effects that go and fetch a land or go and draw a card, so it was an interesting way to see how that all worked out. The third deck in player was Dani's Heliod deck, and this was I think she modified this deck a little bit to have a little bit more of a sexy effect, but at its heart, I believe it was still kind of the mono white Enchantress deck. She likes to be able to put a bunch of her clerics onto the battlefield, and you can see Cathar's Crusade there in order to, pump all her creatures up. Uh, and this is kind of a pet deck of hers. She's had this deck for a long time. So I think she played this one previously. I cannot remember. She said that she made a couple changes, but she did not go into detail of what they were. But yeah, standard Heliod deck. Chroma's Memorial is a big, kind of a big bomb in the deck. And then of course there are some like don't hit me effects. So crawl space, and then I'm sure she had like ghostly prison, and I'm sure fear of safety is in here as well. So her standard kind of like leave me alone until I can build up, and then she becomes a big threat in the mid to late game. The fourth and final deck was from Phyrexian, and it was Teneb the Grave Recur. And I believe toward the end of the episode, he said that Teneb was kind of a, how should I put this? Not a false commander, but kind of a misleading commander. The ability to recur something was good for him, but there were some other kind of interesting effects in this deck. One thing I do want to draw attention to at the beginning of this episode is that you will see that he did his best to represent the Praetors of, Praetor's Magic and Praetor's Council, with Sheoldred, Elish Norn, and Vorinclex all being in the deck, which makes it a very, 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 very mean deck. And then there's some other like standard stuff. I like the idea of like Bramble Sovereign down there with like Solemn and Playcrafter and Reclamation Sage. He has Birthing Pod, he has Panharmonicon, so it's kind of like an ETB recursion style deck, which, white and black can already do very well, green and black can already do very well. And when you put them all together and get Abzan, they can do it very, very well. So this was going into this game, like looking over his deck, I already knew that he was going to be a pretty big threat. With the deck intros out of the way and our sponsors all talked about, I do want to hop into the game, so here we go. Alright, so starting off the game, I did manage to win the die roll, probably because I'm the best. I start with a Marsh Flats, which of course I'm going to pay the 1 and go search. One thing I do like about Magic Online is that it has a lower cost when it comes to some very expensive cards. I can only imagine that I would want to go out of my way to get an expensive land, and of course, there you go, there's a Savannah. I also get a Mox Amber to start off the game, which is really good for this deck. This is a very powerful start, especially once Kethis gets out. John starts his turn off with just a Plains, tapping it so that he doesn't have to have responses, and passing the turn. Dani starts off her turn pretty explosively of things to come, starting off with her Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, which will become really good as she starts getting a large devotion to white, but for right now, she just passes the turn. Phyrexian starts off with a Godless Shrine, and doesn't have a turn 1 play, so he just lets it enter the battlefield tapped. No need to use land if you're not going to be able to play anything. For my second turn, I start with a Windswept Teeth, which is of course another tutor. Going to find a Bayou, again showing off my budget a little bit, and I play an Argos Bloodfast. I like getting this out early because it does of course mean that I can draw a lot of cards. John starts off his second turn with a Star Compass, trying to ramp. Of course, like I talked about in the beginning, Mono White not always the best at ramping, so he's doing everything he can to get an early start with everybody else. Dani plays a Plains, she taps out and passes the turn. Phyrexian starts his turn on tapping, playing Forest, tapping both, and getting a Golgari Signet. He's of course trying to ramp up because his commander is pretty expensive, and like we talked about, the Praetors are also pretty expensive, so. My turn, I drop a Scrub land, completing all my ABUR lands. Tap out, and I play myself a Kethis. I don't have anything else to do, so I pass the turn. John starts his turn by playing his Knight of the White Orchid. He wants to make sure he has a target, which is me, of somebody who has more lands. That's why he didn't play that land first, which after searching for the plains, he puts down his land for turn. Which means he's doing a really good job of ramping up for a mono white deck especially. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we talked about in the beginning of the video, where Knight of the White Orchid, if he can bounce that, especially with 2 green players, he can potentially keep up very well. Dani untaps at the beginning of her turn, plays a Plains, and taps for a Spear of Heliod. Again, she's looking to make a lot of her Cleric tokens, so this just adding 1 power across however many bodies she's had can actually add up a lot and spell the end for somebody. Phyrexian untaps, plays a Forest, taps 3 for a Savala, Heart of the Wilds, and speaking of ramp, this is actually huge ramp for his deck because his commander, again, is a 6/6 Flying Dragon. Not to mention it also does provide card draw if he's going to be playing the biggest, beefiest things, like say Elish Norn or Vorinclex or whatever. I play a forest at the beginning of my turn. Tap all of my lands for a Elspeth Sun's Champion. That, of course, got discounted 1 from Kethis, and I can basically start pumping out tokens. John taps out and hits a Generous Gift, hitting my Elspeth to get it off the field. Going to combat, I decide that, of course, because John gets rid of my Planeswalker, I'm going to attack him. He can block with his 2/2, or he could just take the 3 damage. It's early enough where it might not matter a lot, because especially in a Planeswalker scenario, is not really a Voltron deck. For John's turn, he drops the Plains. He brings his commander in. It's not the biggest thing on the battlefield, so he doesn't get to draw a card. He then goes through his combat phase, not wanting to lash out at anybody, keeping up blockers, and passes the turn. During Dani's turn, she drops the Plains. Of course, she and John are going to be doing that a lot. She taps 4 and plays Consecrated Effort. This is a unique card for this deck, so basically she has a way of doing what Odric, the newer Odric, can do, but in an enchanted way, or an enchantment way, I should say. We go to Phyrexian's turn. Consecrated Effort went off, but she doesn't have any creatures. Phyrexian plays a Plains. Activating Savala, he's able to cast a Mana Reflections. This should set off a lot of alarm bells. It basically doubles mana from all of its permanents. Very scary. During my upkeep, Danielle's Consecrated Effort goes up again, and of course again she doesn't have creatures. I tap for Elspeth, Knight Errant, going of course into apparently my tribal Elspeth deck. And I activate her plus ability, making another soldier. More tokens. Ha ha ha. This does trigger Savala, but I won't draw the card, because of course a 1/1 soldier is not the biggest thing on this battlefield. Moving to combat. I recognize that Phyrexian is a threat, and I swing my biggest creatures at him. I'm keeping my 1/1s back as blockers just in case. And since he's tapped out, he takes 6. John goes to his own untap and upkeep. Dani's Consecrated Effort goes off. Still no creatures. He plays a Plains. John taps 7 and plays Approach of the Second Sun for the first time in this game. I remember in the game, I audible groaned because I'm like, oh god, this is how I'm going to lose when I'm playing a Super Friends deck. Because the history is that Dani stole a win out from under me when I was playing my Joda Super Friends deck, where I was doing very well and had already killed the other 2 players. Not wanting to attack, John goes to pass the turn. Of course, Dani's Consecrated Effort goes off, and once again, it does nothing yet. Dani taps 4 to bring out her commander. It's important to note that she does have enough for her commander to be a creature, which is why Savala is actually going to draw her a card. She passes through her combat, her second main phase, and then ends her turn. Phyrexian turn starts, and he has a lot of mana to play with. And here we see the actual win con of his deck. He's playing a almost all permanent deck, and plays Primal Surge, meaning he's going to get a bunch of things off the top of his deck. I try to draw a card in response, seeing if maybe there's something that will help us if he doesn't have the way to kill us on this turn. At this point, the stack starts to get a little bit crazy as permanents just start flying in from Phyrexian's deck. At this point, you can see that Phyrexian's almost entire deck is getting out onto the battlefield. We decided that we didn't need to really continue to play. There was going to be some way that he had haste. As a matter of fact, I think it's already on the battlefield. It is like an Akroma's Memorial or something like that. So he has a way to swing out. So he does have haste. He has a million creatures. He has a million mana. Everything's indestructible because of the Akroma's Memorial. So we decide that this game is basically over. Because of how quick that game did go, we do decide to shuffle up and play another one. For game 2, we start off. It looks like John's won the die roll, and he starts off with just the basic Plains. We move to Dani's turn, and of course by now we are already making the jokes of we're going to kill Phyrexian absolutely first. She plays her first Plains, taps it, and passes the turn. Phyrexian starts off with a Myriad Landscape. Of course it enters the battlefield tapped, so he is going to pass. For my turn, I start with a Temple Garden. There's no first turn play, so I let it enter the battlefield tapped instead of paying 2 life for no reason. John plays his second Plains. And of course he doesn't want a Knight of the White Orchard because nobody has more lands than him. The struggles of mono white going first. Dani plays her second Plains of the game. And faces a similar issue that John does. She moves through combat, her second main phase, and passes the turn. Phyrexian plays a forest. taps both, and gets a Silesian Signet on the field, the first person to ramp in this game. I play a Karn's Bastion, which is not really the best land that I want to see here, because I do want colored mana in order to get Kethis out, but I am able to play a Farseek, which this will help me get colored lands so that I can still stay on track of playing Kethis at hopefully turn 3. I fetch a Godless Shrine. I let it enter the battlefield tapped because, again, I'm not going to do anything, and this means that I won't have to worry about paying 2 life later on in the game instead of getting like the Bayou or the Savannah now. John plays a Strip Mine, which is terrifying, and passes the turn, leaving all his mana up. Very suspicious. Dani plays her third planes of the game, taps all of them, and gets a Darksteel Ingot onto the field. While some people might not understand why she's playing this because she doesn't need mana of any color, she just needs white, it's still an indestructible mana source in a deck that has maybe some trouble ramping. With nothing else to do, she moves through her combat, second main phase, and passes the turn. Phyrexian plays a Swamp, taps 2, and cracks his Myriad Landscape. John flashes in an Aven Mind Sensor though, which is a real gotcha moment, because now there's potential that Phyrexian just basically time walked himself, getting almost no value this turn. And sure enough, that's what happens. There are no lands in the top few cards of his deck. On my turn, I tap 3 and get a Gideon Blackblade. This is one of the newer planeswalkers from War of the Spark, and he's got an interesting static ability where as long as it's my turn, he's a creature. I use his plus ability with no real target and pass my turn. Because he was a creature, he actually did have to deal with Summoning Sickness. On John's turn, he plays another Plains, goes to combat, and swings 2 at Gideon. We do have a conversation about why he's choosing to hit Gideon when Phyrexian just won with a Primal Surge. John's concern is that I'm going to start using my -6 ability on Gideon to like take out his permanents. Dani plays a Plains. She taps 4 to get her commander out first this time. And I'm sure she plans on pumping out clerics soon enough. She then taps out so she doesn't have to worry about responses before ending her turn. Phyrexian plays a Mana Confluence on his turn, hoping to get back into ramping since he was kind of messed up from the Aven Mind Center. He then taps 2, plays a Golgari Signet, taps 2 more, and plays a Lightning Greaves. That can be pretty scary with his commander and some of the other big beefy creatures in his deck. But for now, he passes the turn. Gideon becomes a creature again on the beginning of my turn. I drop a Plains. I tap 3 for a Pure Imaginative Rascal. Because I'm using a lot of Planeswalkers, this is a pretty good card. Unfortunately, there's no way I can have Toothy in a no blue deck. As a matter of fact, nobody's playing blue in this game. So I randomly target someone. I don't remember if it was myself, and they have the option to shuffle. I use my +1 ability. This time I do have a target because I have Pure out. I decide to give him Indestructible, and I move to combat. During combat, I do ask John if he plans to continue to attack Gideon with Aven Mind Sensor. He says he feels he has to keep the Planeswalker in check, so I decide that I'm going to attack him. He decides to hit my Karn's Bastion with a Strip Mine. That way I can't continue to proliferate and basically beat out the damage that he can put back on Gideon with Aven Mind Sensor. During John's turn, Aven Mind Sensor untaps, and Gideon stops being a creature. Because of the overlay, you can't see it, but it is on the right side of my battlefield. John also plays a Plains to start off his turn. Goes to combat. He aims his attack at Gideon again, and passes his turn. Dani starts off her turn, playing a Cather's Crusade. This can be terrifying, because if she finds a way to get enough mana to start pumping out clerics, those clerics are going to become huge, and she's going to have an overwhelming force. She then taps out again. Her commander's not a creature yet, because of the whole god complex. And she passes the turn. Phyrexian starts his turn on tapping. He pays 4 for a Whip of Erebos. This is an interesting card in his deck because he does want to recur things, and with Whip of Erebos, he gets an effect back once, but then he can't get it back again. With no creatures and nothing else to do, he passes through his combat, and then to the end of his turn. I begin my turn, Gideon becoming a creature again. I target Pure with Gideon's +1, giving him lifelink this time. I move to combat. And again, I swing both creatures at John. I gain 1 life from Pier hitting with lifelink, and I go to the end of my turn with nothing else to do with the mana that I have out. John drops the plains at the beginning of his turn. He taps 5 for his commander, which is going to make attacking him a lot harder thanks to that 3/6 double strike. He attacks Gideon again with the Aven Mind Sensor, and not only do I not have any creatures untapped, but I don't have flyers even if I did have a creature untapped. And Gideon takes 2. Dani starts off her turn playing a Darksteel Citadel. I believe somebody makes a joke about, oh no, Dani's playing Indestructible Land, she must be trying to Armageddon. She's not, for record, she's not. She taps 6, make that 7, and plays a Silent Sentinel. This is one of the cards that she really enjoys in her paper version of this deck because it can get her enchantments back. It also does turn her commander into a creature thanks to having a devotion of 5, and the Kethis Crusade then triggers, putting a 1/1 counter on all of her creatures, meaning her commander just got even bigger. Then he moves to combat and hits Phyrexian for 6 commander damage. 3 more hits like that and he'll be out of the game. Phyrexian starts off his turn, putting down an Overgrown Tomb. This time he does shock himself because he does want the mana. He taps out completely to play his commander, Teneb the Harvester, and moves to equip the Lightning Greaves to his commander. However, I respond with a Path to Exile, which of course makes him gain that 6 life back. With no other mana, he decides to then pass the turn. My turn starts, and again, Gideon becomes a creature. I drop a Forest. I tap 2 for a Sword of the Animist, and then tap 2 to equip it to Pier. I plus Gideon, targeting Pier, giving him Vigilance. This time he can attack without being tapped, so I can hold him back as a blocker. I attack with Pier, which then triggers the Sword of the Animist. Because of Aven Mind Sensor, I can only dig 4. I am heartbroken to see the Great Henge in my top 4, meaning that I won't be getting that card anytime soon. And I hit Phyrexian back down to 31. John starts and plays another Plains. I believe it's about this time that John and I start having a conversation about whether or not I would use Heliod on his permanents, and also the fact that we are going back and forth with these attacks, and it's causing Dani's field to now become pretty scary. And, you know, Phyrexian's had the potential to suddenly start going kind of crazy himself with that Teneb, which would have had haste and Drought and lifelink thanks to the boots and the Whip of Erebos. I believe I'm trying to convince him that I'm already kind of screwed on mana. I only have 4 lands to start because of the Strip Mine and not really drawing many. I can't really fetch because of the Sword of the Animus and the Aven Mind Sensor. So he plays Banishing Light and hits the Kethis Crusade, hoping to slow down Dani's advancement. This also does turn her commander back into just an enchantment because she no longer has 5 devotion on the field. John goes to combat, and I believe we came to somewhat of a pass. Not to mention that because he just did something with Dani, he doesn't want to have no flying blockers up, so he keeps his Aven Mind Sensor back for just in case that Silent Sentinel comes toward him. Dani starts her turn, giving out a Sarah's Blessing. We comment that it seems redundant, but she turns around and says that's exactly what it's for, redundancy. She then pays 2 more for a Blind Obedience, which is actually 10 times worse. Because now, not only does she have Vigilance, we no longer can have our creatures enter the battlefield as blockers. Dani then taps 3 for a Haunted Cloak. The secondary sub-theme of Dani's deck is somewhat Voltron-y, so she does have some cards that will turn Heliod into basically a one-shot. She moves to combat. This time she diversifies her attacks a little bit. Heliod is coming at me for commander damage, while the Silent Sentinel actually goes at John. He chooses not to sacrifice the Aven Mind Sensor this turn, and we pass to Phyrexian. Phyrexian then plays a Burnish Dart, knowing that he has the mana to sacrifice it. Unfortunately, it will not work as the usual blocker that would be good because of the Blind Obedience. He does equip the Lightning Greaves just so nobody can remove it at instant speed. Not that I think anybody is gunning for it, but just in case. I untap, and Gideon becomes a creature. I start off playing an Interplanar Beacon, which is a really good land in this deck because it lets me gain life as I play Planeswalkers, and it kind of fixes my mana a little bit. I can turn 1 mana into any 2 mana of the Ravnica Guild combinations. I tap 3 for my commander for the first time this game, Kethis the Hidden Hand. He does enter the battlefield tapped thanks to the Blind Obedience. I then tap 1 to feed into the interplanar beacon for enough mana to play a Kaya Orzhov Usurper, of course reduce 1 by Kethis. I gain 1 life from the interplanar beacon. I use the plus ability on Kaya, just getting rid of the Myriad Landscape. There's no real purpose other than just plussing my Planeswalker. That makes it harder for them to just be destroyed at any random time through combat. Activate Gideon's ability, again targeting Pier. This time I give him Vigilance, that way I can attack. Moving to combat, Pier goes at Phyrexian Walker so that I can try to get a Sword of the Animist trigger, hopefully finding something even through the top 4 thanks to the Aven Mind Sensor. And I do. I'm able to find a swamp. Phyrexian doesn't have any blockers, so he takes 2, going down to 29, and I pass the turn. John starts off his turn playing a Rogue's Passage, which, again, given how big his commander can hit out of nowhere, is a little scary. He taps 6 for his own Elspeth Sun's Champion, to which I cry foul, because hey, if I can't have one, why can you? Unfortunately, I can't really do anything about it at this point, so it does get to enter the battlefield, and he pluses her, getting his own 3 1/1 tokens. I remember when I had 1/1 tokens, and then we all died to Primal Surge. John goes to combat, but passes through, not wanting to spike any ire at this point, going a little bit more on the defensive thanks to Blind Obedience. And we start with Dani's turn. Dani pays 6 for Plea for Guidance. Remind her that Aven Mind Sensor says that she's not going to be able to search her entire deck. And she pays 1 to Extort, pinging us all for 1 and gaining 3 life. Unfortunately, she's not able to find anything, and that means that she kind of wasted the spell, but she had hoped to be able to find something in order to get rid of either the Aven Mind Sensor or maybe even the Vanishing Light. She enters her combat step, but chooses not to do anything because again people are starting to get more on the defensive and goes to pass her turn. Phyrexian chooses not to crack the Burnished Heart, instead going into his turn, tapping 2 for a Sylvan Library, and then 4 for a Panharmonicon. Things are potentially about to get very scary. The Panharmonicon does enter the battlefield tapped due to the Blind Obedience, but that doesn't really affect its capabilities. He chooses not to attack with the Burnished Heart and passes the turn. My turn starts, and Gideon becomes a creature once again. I use Interplanar Beacon and most of my mana in order to play Vraska, the Relic Seeker. I am going to gain a life off the Interplanar Beacon, and I activate Gideon's Plus to give Pier Indestructible. I activate Vraska in order to destroy the Panharmonicon because I just don't know what's going to happen next turn, and then use Kaya's +1 ability to get rid of the Plea for Guidance. Not that I think Dani's going to be able to get anything back with it, but just in case. I move to combat, and I send Pier over at Phyrexian, again mainly for the Sword of the Animist trigger, even though I do only get the top 4 to search, thanks to, again, Aven Mind Sensor. Unfortunately, this time I don't find a basic in my top 4, and Phyrexian takes 2, not wanting again to chump block with the Burnished Heart when he really wants those lands. With no more mana, I pass my turn. John taps 2 for a Wall of Omens, getting himself a zombie and a card from the Wall of Omens enter the battlefield effect. The zombie does, of course, and the wall will also enter the battlefield tapped thanks to the Blind Obedience. John then activates Elspeth's +1, getting 3 more tapped tokens. He moves into his combat phase, but he ultimately decides not to attack. He goes to his end step with some mana left untapped, and Dani starts her turn. Dani taps 1 for an Authority of the Consuls, meaning that nobody's ever going to have untapped stuff ever. He also chooses to extort the table again, hitting everybody for 1 and gaining 3 life. It is important to note that the Authority will also continue to gain her life, especially if she starts pumping out tokens with her Heliod. We move into Dani's combat phase, but again she ultimately decides not to do anything. Phyrexian's Sylvan Library triggers at his draw phase. I almost said upkeep because I'm so used to upkeep triggers, but it is important to note that Sylvan Library is a draw step, not an upkeep. Phyrexian ultimately decides to take 4 to keep 1 card. He plays a Savannah and taps for a Ravenous Chupacabra. Both the Authority of the Consuls and the Ravenous Chupacabra trigger, with the Ravenous Chupacabra getting rid of the Aven Mind Sensor. So now we're able to do fetching a little bit more accurately. We go into Phyrexian's combat, but with only a Burnished Heart, there's no way he wants to make any attacks. I start my turn with Gideon Blackblade becoming a creature. I tap 4 for a Death Sprout, with the Destroy trigger going toward the Silent Sentinel. This will also help me get a land onto the basic land onto the battlefield tapped, since now I'm allowed to search my entire library, not just my top 4. Thanks, Aven Mind Sensor. And Dani considers what she's going to do to me after the game because I'm blowing up her creature. The spell resolves, and I decide to fetch out a Swamp, and I activate Kaya's +1 in order to exile the Silent Sentinel from her graveyard, meaning it's gone forever. It also allows me to gain 2 life because it was a creature card. I use Vraska's plus ability to create a 2/2 pirate with Menace, but it does enter the battlefield tapped for both the blind, obedience, and authority of the consuls, and Dani gains 1 life from the latter. I choose to activate Gideon's +1 on Pier once again, and I give him Indestructible, just in case anybody tries to flash out a blocker or anything crazy. Again, I use my Interplanar Beacon to filter some mana, this time for a Vraska Golgari Queen, gain 1 life from the beacon, and then +1 Vraska, sacrificing my pirate token in order to gain another life and draw a new card. Moving into my combat step, I swing Pier at Phyrexian, triggering the Sword of the Animus, which means I can finally get an actual land for the first time with this trigger from my entire library. I get another Force because there are a decent amount of green spells in this deck, and Phyrexian blocks with Burnished Heart, tapping 3 and sacrificing the Burnished Heart in order to go find 2 lands himself. This should put him at enough mana to recast Teneb, and again he does have the Lightning Greaves to give it haste, and the Whip of Erebos to give it lifelink, meaning that he could jump up to 25 life next turn, provided nobody else hits him. I pass my turn with nothing else to do, and John starts off his turn tapping 3 for a Cloudstone Curio. This is a very dangerous card in this deck because it can enable a lot of shenanigans, which means he could suddenly start drawing a lot of cards, or he could just suddenly start getting a bunch of zombies. We go into his combat phase, and he swings a couple of tokens each at 2 of my planeswalkers. I don't have much in the way of blockers, so they do get ticked down a little bit. And then John plays a Metallic Mimic, which will then allow him to bounce a creature with the Cloudstone Curio, and also make him a token based because of God Eternal Oketra. Dani gains a life from the zombie coming into the battlefield, and John decides to pick up his Wall of Omens, which will then of course allow him to draw a card. Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield and is given some creature type that I unfortunately can't read to give +1/+1 counters to. Wall of Omens then comes back down, which will draw him a card, get him a token, and enable him to bounce one of his creatures. Dani continues to gain life from the authority of the consuls. And John decides not to pick up any of his creatures. John then does activate his Elsif's +1, getting 3 more tokens. This is going to allow him to bounce up to 3 more creatures and give Dani 3 more life. At this point, the table is hoping for a board wipe because John's field has suddenly exploded, becoming much more dangerous. John uses the first trigger from the Cloudstone Curio to pick up his Wall of Omens, which he then replays, again to get another zombie, another card, and Dani will gain another life. Oh, for reference, the chosen type with Metallic Mimic must have been zombie because as you can see, 2 of the zombies have entered with 1/1 counters. Dani starts off her turn and miracles a Terminus, which pretty much saves the board because next turn there's a good chance that John would have at least killed somebody, if not maybe put himself in a winning position. However, Dani has a different trick up her sleeve and decides to hit Fumigate. This will give her a bunch of life, and she also extorts the table. She's now at a whopping 79 life, and maybe we wanted the Terminus instead. Still, Dani passes her turn with no more mana left, and Phyrexian's Sylvan Library triggers on his draw step. Phyrexian opts to not keep any of the cards, probably due to the fact that he's getting to be a very low life total. Taps 3 for a Farhaven Elf, which will give Dani another life and enter the battlefield tapped. The Farhaven Elf gets a Forest, which enters the battlefield tapped. And then he pays 5 for a Sidisi Undead Vizier. While this will give Dani 1 life from the authority of the consuls, he will be able to tutor a card if he exploits the Farhaven Elf. Or he could potentially even exploit the Sidisi itself. In the end, he chooses the Farhaven Elf to be exploited, and he's able to tutor a card. We can only imagine at this point that he's tutoring for the Primal Surge, because he has enough mana to cast it next turn, and that will basically win him the game. He moves the Lightning Greaves onto the Sidisi just to keep up a creature into the next turn, hopefully. I start my turn with Gideon, of course, becoming a creature. That's one of the good things about Gideon, is that he can survive board wipes by being a Planeswalker on everybody else's turn, and then a creature on your turn. I use Vraska's plus ability to make another pirate, which of course gains Dani a life. I then use my other Vraska to destroy Phyrexian's Lightning Greaves. And I use Kaya's plus ability to get rid of the Aven Mind Sensor. This will gain me 2 life, and of course just make sure the Aven Mind Sensor for some reason couldn't come back. I move the Sword of the Animus onto Gideon for the attack since he doesn't have Summoning Sickness. This isn't the most mana efficient thing because every turn you would have to re-equip Gideon, because when he becomes a Planeswalker he's suddenly not going to be able to do that, but I still need the lands. I'm still trying to get cards out of my deck, so I have to kind of deal with it for now. I opt to bring the best basic land type onto the battlefield with Sword of the Animist. It's a swamp. And I do knock John's Elspeth down to 2 from 7 just to make sure that she doesn't ult. I then exile the Sidisi with Gideon's minus ability. That way there can't be any kind of recursion shenanigans. He is playing Teneb, he does have Whip of Erebos on the battlefield. So I'm just trying to take away options from Phyrexian, even though I do think he already has a Primal Surge in his hand thanks to the last tutor. I tap 4 in order to bring out Erebos, God of the Dead. I like this card because it's a mana sink that enables me to draw cards, and of course it's a legendary permanent which works with Kethis. John starts his turn putting down a Plains. He could potentially opt to bounce a land to his hand. That's probably not optimal in a mono white deck without lots of land drops, but it is something to consider for like landfall decks. John taps 7 for Approach of the Second Sun. The thinking here is that if Phyrexian doesn't win on the next turn, he could try to draw as many cards as possible and try to get the win through that. He then plus ones Elseth, getting his 3/1/1 tokens. Dani is going to gain the life from them, and Curio Cloudstone is going to trigger, but without anything with a crazy answer to the battlefield effects, he's not going to probably bounce any of his tokens. And John moves through his combat phase into his second main, and then to pass the turn. Dani starts by playing her scariest land, which is Serra's Sanctum. This already taps for 4 mana just on entering the battlefield now. Then it can potentially get much crazier if she continues to poop out tokens, which she starts off doing that. So now Serra's Sanctum will start with, or we'll tap for 5 mana instead. Dani then makes another token, and then a third token. Without any more mana, and no creatures that are not summoning sick, she moves through her combat phases and passes the turn. During Phyrexian's draw step, his Sylvan Library triggers, and he opts to draw 1 card off Sylvan Library, paying the 4 life. Phyrexian taps everything, has just enough for Primal Surge, and this is going to take a while. So as these triggers start to stack up, we're going to move forward and get toward the end of what's happening. As you can see, Phyrexian's board has been flooded with all kinds of permanents. He's moved to his combat. He has haste on a few of his creatures, including, I believe, some tokens of the Ashen Rider, which will exile some stuff, or did exile some stuff when it entered the battlefield. At this point, we're pretty confident that Phyrexian is going to win in another turn or two, except for one thing, which is going to come into play in a second. Phyrexian puts some damage to Dani, and he moves to end his turn. At the beginning of my turn, Phyrexian's Shieldred triggers, forcing me to sacrifice my 1/1 elephant because of Elishnorn being on the battlefield. I also play a land, which I believe was a swamp, and I go to tap some mana that takes a little bit longer than usual due to Vorinclex being on the battlefield and triggering off of each tapped land. I play my own Sidisi, Undead Vizier, and Phyrexian's Bramble Sovereign triggers, along with some other things. Phyrexian does actually pay for me to get another Sidisi. This becomes a little complicated because there's an exploit trigger, there's a second exploit trigger, and then there is, of course, the Legends rule that has to get mopped up. I exploit the token to its own trigger, which then allows me to tutor up a card from my library. Phyrexian then gives me another Sidisi with the Bramble Sovereign, and I choose to exploit the second token, which will of course give me another tutor. I move into my combat step, and then move to pass the turn. At the beginning of John's turn, he has to sacrifice his token due to the Shieldred. John starts his turn tapping 1 for a Path to Exile, which is going to hit the Avacyn, which is keeping Phyrexian's entire board from being destroyed. And of course, the planes that he taps will not untap due to Vorinclex. John then taps 5 with all the Vorinclex triggers happening and hits a Fumigate. This will put John's life total at a pretty high amount while also wiping Phyrexian's board. Because Phyrexian Primal Surged most of his deck out, he doesn't have a lot of cards, so at this point we're attempting to stall him so that he may not lose due to damage or his life total becoming 0, but he may actually deck himself with no more cards left in his library and unable to continue drawing. John shoots up to 50 life with no creatures on Phyrexian's field, and then John drops a Solemn Simulacrum. Some triggers happen due to creatures dying on Phyrexian's field. The Ashen Rider is going to exile Dani's Heliod because it's an indestructible permanent. John moves into his combat phase and passes the turn. Dani starts her turn, getting her commander back for 6 mana, and Phyrexian chooses to activate his Pernicious Deed, destroying each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost 3 or less. In response, I tap 3 and play Teferi's Protection. This will keep all my permanents on the battlefield, meaning that nothing will get removed from me because they will all be phased out. It was one of the cards that I tutored with one of the Sidisi triggers. My permanents phase out before the Pernicious Deed goes, which cleans up the battlefields even more, including getting Dani's Cathar's Crusade back because Banishing Light was removed, and then Heliod enters the battlefield. Of course, he is not a creature because Dani's Devotion to White is only 3. Dani moves through her combat phase and passes her turn. Phyrexian activates his Whip of Erebos, targeting his Eternal Witness, which triggers twice due to the Panharmonicon. This means he's going to get 2 cards from his graveyard instead of just 1 back to his hand. It's important to remember that he does have the Zendikar Resurgent and the Mana Reflections on his battlefield, meaning he has so much mana. He recasts his Bramble Sovereign, one of the cards that he returned. Unfortunately, we realize now that Zendikar Resurgent says that you have to draw the card. That means that Phyrexian, who no longer has cards in his graveyard, has lost the game due to decking himself out. It was a little bit of a mix-up between Primal Surge triggers, how deep to go into his library, not realizing that one of his draw effects was not a May, and of course, the infinite board wipes that we had. My turn starts, the Teferi's Protection wears off, my couple of lands are still tapped due to the Vorinclex from last turn, and I can take my turn as normal aside from that. I start by playing a land, filtering some mana through my Interplanar Beacon, and replay Vraska Relic Seeker. The beacon gains me 1 life, putting me almost back up to 40. It's amazing to think that I'm 1 away from my starting life total, and I am the lowest on the board of people who are still around. I use Vraska's +1 in order to make a pirate, really just a measly blocker in case that Heliod suddenly becomes a creature and tries to come over here and punch me in the face. I pass my turn to John, who unfortunately can't untap most of his lands due to, again, the Vorinclex. He moves into his combat phase and passes the turn to Dani. Lucky for Dani, all of the Vorinclex effects were gone before it was her turn last time, so she does get to fully untap, and she starts by playing land. She taps 4 for a Leyline of the Meek, which is really just kind of a nifty Anthem effect that could have entered the battlefield if she had it in her opening hand. Since she didn't, she has to pay 4, but those 2 white pips means that Heliod is now suddenly a creature. She then pays 4 and makes another little cleric, starting to grow out her field, which of course is going to get pumped now by the Kethis Crusade and the Anthem effects. Dani moves to her combat phase, and chooses not to attack, which I'm a little surprised about, honestly. I start my turn now with all my lands back, and play a Merciless Eviction, exiling all enchantments. For the most part, this is only hitting Dani, but she's also the only person who's scary at the time. I then play an Argos Bloodfast, and equip the Sword of the Animist onto the Pirate. I use Vraska's +1 again in order to make another pirate, a little pirate friend if you will, and I move to combat, attacking Dani with the Sword of the Animist pirate that doesn't have summoning sickness in order to pull another land out of my deck. Naturally, I pick a swamp, and Dani takes 2. With nothing else to do, I tap out and pass my turn to John. Again, because it's a turn after Vorinclex, he now has all of his lands to play with, and he starts by playing God Eternal Oketra, which he did get to only pay 5 for because it went to his graveyard and he drew it back up to play from his hand instead of from the command zone. Paying 0, he gets an Ornithopter, which of course gives him a 4/4 zombie, and John passes the turn to Danielle. Dani says she doesn't have anything to do and passes to her second main phase and drops a land. She passes the turn with a lot of mana open. I start my turn by sacrificing Windswept Teeth in order to go find a Forest or Plains, and naturally have to show off all my good lands, and I get a scrub land. I choose John to ult Vraska on because I believe he's going to become the biggest threat, and at this point, unless he has a removal spell in his hand, he can't block both of my Menace Pirates. So this is my best opportunity to take him out of the game and then deal with Dani, who has considerably less going on at this point. I move to combat, right click, attack all at John, get a Sword of the Animist trigger, and find another swamp for the battlefield. John decides to double block the token that has the Sword of the Animist on it. This is probably his best play since he doesn't have a removal spell for the other pirate. This means that I'll have to pay the 2 mana to equip the Sword of the Animist onto a new token. It's the best way to inconvenience me since I am, after all, taking him out. First strike damage happens and the token dies to Oketra. And then regular damage would have gone through and John would be at -1, but he chooses to concede after declaring blockers and getting my 1 creature out of the way. I choose to tap 7 mana and play the Great Henge. The reduction is only 2 because that's the only creature I have on the battlefield, and honestly though, this card is worth it with all of the crazy things that it can do. Or at least enable with the draw card, gain life, blah blah blah. I tap the Great Henge for mana, which also gives me 2 life, and play Kethis again. When Kethis enters the battlefield, he triggers the Great Henge, giving him a +1/+1 counter and enabling me to draw a card. I pass the turn to Dani. During her combat, I choose to pay 2 and 2 life to draw a card with Argos Bloodfast. In her second main phase, she plays her commander for the 3rd time, paying 8 mana. Of course, he's not a creature just yet due to not having enough devotion. Dani taps out because she doesn't have anything to play and passes the turn. I start my turn by playing Drora's Familiar. Because legendary spells are historic, this will now also count as reducing the cost. I then play a Garruk Wildspeaker for just 2 green mana, which his +1 is to untap 2 green lands, or to untap 2 lands, so I essentially just played a Planeswalker for free. However, instead I do choose to make a beast, because I need to be able to kill Dani from 63 life. It is important to note that Drora's Familiar did get a +1/+1 counter, and I did draw a card and gain 2 life, all from the Great Henge. I then replay Elspeth's Sun's Champion, gaining a life from the Interplanar Beacon, and I use the +1 to make 3 new tokens. I play a Verdant Catacomb and immediately sacrifice it to go find a swamp or forest, and then I move to equip the Sword of the Animist on the pirate token that can attack this turn. I attack with everything over at Dani, getting my Sword of the Animist trigger, and pulling my last swamp out of the deck. Dani takes 7 damage, going down to 56, still 16 life over her starting life total, and it's her turn. Dani starts her turn paying 5 for a Celestial Ancient. This is similar to her Kethis Crusade, but this time it's with enchantments. Speaking of enchantments, she makes a Cleric enchantment creature token, but the Celestial Ancient triggers off of cast and not off of enter the battlefield. Still, having created a few blockers, she goes to combat and passes her turn. I choose to pay some life and draw some cards with Argos Bloodfast. I start my turn by dropping a land and playing Derju with Eyes Open. This card will enable me to go and fetch out a Planeswalker into my hand, as well as drawing a card with the Great Henge. Next, I play Liliana Dreadhorde General, which is basically the end of the game in my eyes. I do gain 1 life off the Interplanar Beacon, I use Elspeth's plus ability to create some more token fodder, and I explain that with Liliana, I'm going to be able to constantly make everybody sacrifice 2 creatures, and then because I can make enough creatures to deal with this problem with Elspeth, essentially Dani won't ever get to have a board, and I'll just keep amassing creatures and hit her probably over the course of like the next 4 turns because her life is so high. And in order to cut time, Dani chooses to concede the game, and hey, I win. I do have to say, the 2 games were actually quite long. The video that did have the audio problems was 3 hours long. So I am kind of glad that we did have those audio issues and I was able to just do this narration video for everyone. I think this is a little bit quicker, and you do have to miss out on the banter that we have while playing the game, but like stuff with the Primal Surge and waiting and etc., we do kind of like get bored, I guess. So it was kind of nice to be able to do this. Maybe every once in a while we'll do these kind of videos again. With that being said, Game 2 obviously was a little bit more interesting, and Game 1 was an explosive Primal Surge win. For the most part, we underestimated what Phyrexian's deck could do in Game 1, and that's why we didn't necessarily keep up removal for the mana reflections. But either way, he already had it in his hand, and nobody was playing blue. So eventually he was going to get to it, short of maybe killing him first, and I don't know that we would have thought to do that without seeing it happen once. Overall, I did enjoy my deck. I felt like it played much better than just the legendary creature beatdown deck that I had the first time I played it. I am very jealous of how Don's deck works when he plays it, because his is essentially I don't want to say good stuff, but kind of a beat down, beat 'em up, big legendary creature style deck, and he plays it and it works very well for him. I was a little sad it didn't work for me like that, but I also do like Super Friends decks, so I'll probably keep playing it again. For John's deck, I think it actually worked very well. There was very little he could have done about the Primal Surge, minus if he was running a lot of land destruction or something crazy like that. And John said later on in the game that he wasn't doing that kind of thing. So there was no real way to stop Primal Surge from him. I did like the Aven Mind Sensor play in the second game. I felt like it was well timed, and it did kind of put us on the back foot for a long time until we could deal with the Aven Mind Sensor. Overall, he had some other cool synergies, the Cloudstone Curio, the Ornithopter, just to get like triggers. Because honestly, he could have then, between Cloudstone, Curio, and Ornithopter, made as many zombies as he wanted, just constantly bouncing, Ornithopter back to his hand, especially if he had other cost reducers or another 0 drop. For Dani's deck, I've seen it play many times. It's based on her deck in paper, and it always terrifies me. There were a few new cards in it that I noticed that I hadn't seen before, and I know that we didn't own in paper, and I think it did work overall well. In the second game, she was very scary, and she did gain a lot of life. I don't know if she's running Aetherflux Reservoir, I'd have to go back and look at the list, but that would definitely be another win con for her, as I believe she is running Approach of the Second Sun. For Phyrexian's deck, it's kind of a one-trick deck, you have to say. Like, yes, it can beat you down with all those big creatures, especially if the Praetors come out and everything, and it's got a lot of ramp and all that stuff, but at its heart and soul, it's a Primal Surge deck. Primal Surge is the only non-permanent in the deck, and therefore, it does kind of suffer to, having to deal with a little bit of interaction. If you can interact with his deck too much, he essentially can't really play the game. So I'm kind of glad that he did get to have that first game, because we did get to see his deck do his thing. And even when he did it the second time again, I think just realizing that the Zendikar Resurgent was going to mess him up may have changed things. He could have not dug as much, and who knows, he may have still been able to kill like John and Dani, and I don't know if I would have survived past the Teferis Protection. Again, if he realized that he was going to have to draw cards off of something, he could have left, a dozen cards in to give himself a couple turns to deal with it, and then who knows, maybe I couldn't have won. Still, it was a fun couple of games, it was a fun stream, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, remember, if you want to support this channel, make sure you're subscribed for more Commander gameplay, the Sears Angel series that is now out, our weekly podcast Reflections of the Council, and soon, even more content coming your way. Also, make sure you like the video and leave a comment on what you enjoyed the most. Did you like the Primal Surge play? Did you think that was cheesy? Did you like the Teferis Protection? Did you like some of Dani's awesome new cards? Did you like the bounce cards from John's deck? Whatever you want, just let us know down in the comments below. Of course, if you want to be here for these kind of streams live instead of just seeing them on YouTube, you can join us on, again, the second Saturday and the fourth Saturday every month at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at twitch.tv/PraetorMagic. As a matter of fact, you can head over there now and make sure that you're following us there. That way you'll get an email notification when we go live. Also, if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can subscribe to us there. Just so you know, you can combine your Twitch account and your Amazon account and get what's called a Twitch Prime subscription. That is a free subscription once a month for you. You pay nothing, and whoever you subscribe to actually does get that money via Twitch and Amazon's collaborations. If you want to use that for us, we would greatly appreciate it. And of course, you then get some cool perks of being a Twitch subscriber, especially if you are on the Discord and combine your Twitch account with your Discord account. I know, there's a lot of combining accounts, but honestly, it gets you the best value. And of course, if you want to support us in any other way, if you're thinking about getting a playmat, if you're thinking about maybe getting a mouse pad for your computer, or you want a cool bag for, taking your dice to either Friday Night Magic or even your D&D session, head on over to inkgaming.com/PraetorMagic. They'll know we sent you. You're going to pay for those things anyway if you want them, and you get to help us out. And if you're ordering singles and sleeves and all that other good stuff, head on over to this TCG player link that is down in this video description. That again will let them know that we sent you, and we get kickbacks as you order things. It doesn't cost you anything, and if you're going to buy those things anyway, why not, right? Well, that's the end of the video. That's all I have. Make sure you're following us on all of our social media. I'll put the links down below because the list has really just gone on and on and on. We just have so much content that we want to provide to you. But I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you enjoyed the stream if you show up, and I hope you enjoy all of our other content. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it, peace!